Tonight, it's on to New Hampshire.
In spite of all of that they threw at us, everyone against us, we've got our ticket punched out of Iowa.
As Governor Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley continue their fight for the White House.
I was thrilled at the fact that we just wanted to come out strong.
Now, what's next?
So it's now off to New Hampshire, a great place. We won it last time, and we won it both times. And we love it. The people are great.
As voters decide the 2024 presidential campaign. Good evening. I'm Eliott Rodriguez alongside my colleague Jim DeFede. Thank you for joining us for the CBS News Miami special Voters Decide. And Jim, what a night in stone cold, wintry Iowa. You were there in what, early January?
Better temperatures in December. Look, the best thing about this is voting has actually begun. It's no longer talking about, the election. We're now in it.
But they had a lower than expected turnout.
They absolutely did, yes.
Right, we're going to look into what this means and also look ahead toward New Hampshire and South Carolina coming up next week, back-to-back primaries.
We start with New Hampshire a week from today, right. And then by February 24th, we have South Carolina, and somewhere in between then there's a Nevada primary and caucus, which nobody's really paying attention to.
Nobody's talked about Nevada. We're going to talk about it. Governor DeSantis, of course, came in second place in Iowa, but 30 points behind former President Donald Trump. The governor's still upset today about the race's early call. We're going to talk about that, too. Here's what he told supporters late last night about his finish and what's next.
They threw everything but the kitchen sink at us. We love you too. They threw everything but the kitchen sink at us. They spent almost $50 million attacking us. No one's faced that much all the way just through Iowa. The media was against us. They were writing our obituary months ago. They even called the election before people even got a chance to vote. But they were just so excited about the fact that they were predicting that we wouldn't be able to get our ticket punched here out of Iowa. But I can tell you, because of your support, in spite of all of that they threw at us, everyone against us, we've got our ticket punched out of Iowa.
He's got his ticket punched. He also got his clock cleaned. But we'll get into all of that. But we want to bring in now Amanda Rooker, chief political reporter for KCCI in Des Moines. Amanda joined me in Des Moines when I reported from there last month. Amanda, good to see you. It must be nice to finally have this sort of behind you and in warmer temperatures there at your station.
Right. I'm happy to be inside right now. That's for sure, Jim. The last time we talked in Iowa, it was cold by maybe Florida standards, but it was nothing compared to the weather that we just saw this past week. It's been freezing here.
So let's sort of talk about the results last night. I don't think anybody would consider it a surprise that Donald Trump won. All the polling all along showed that he was well ahead. But I do think it was a little bit of a surprise exactly how big a lead he ended up having, a 30-point lead over Ron DeSantis. Give me your reaction to what we saw last night.
I mean, certainly that was a historic landslide victory, the largest amount that any candidate has ever won in the Iowa caucuses was Bob Dole back in 1988. He won by 12.8 percentage points. Donald Trump earned more than half of the vote in Iowa last night. He won by 30 percentage points over Ron DeSantis. So, I mean, that was unlike anything we've ever seen in Iowa. And certainly there was a lot of thought of how much will Donald Trump be able to exceed expectations. He had been polling consistently with a double-digit lead for months, but the last poll before the Iowa caucus had him down at 48%, and he ended up topping that at 51%. So everyone says Iowa is all about exceeding expectations. Donald Trump certainly did that last night.
And Amanda, it seems like he won with every group of voters there in Iowa. Was there any group that Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis can point to and say, those folks were with me in Iowa last night?
It's difficult to say. I mean, because right now we have a lot of the precinct by precinct, county by county data, but we don't necessarily have the exit polling or the complete picture of, who people self-identify as, per precinct. What we knew going into this was that Nikki Haley, her base was, maybe a little bit more the independent or moderate Republicans in the state, that Donald Trump really had that rural, base, and that Ron DeSantis had the most sophisticated, ground game in the state. But what we saw last night was that, like you said, Donald Trump really led with almost every demographic. One thing I think is really interesting is that in 2016, I think exit polls showed that 64% of Republican caucus goers identified as conservative Christians. And Donald Trump really didn't do well with conservative Christians in 2016. And it's why, Ted Cruz, edged him out in 2016 and won the caucuses. Last night, Donald Trump did much better. There's a pocket of Northwest Iowa that's, really home to a lot of those conservative Christians. And Sioux County was Donald Trump's worst county in 2016. He only won 11% of the vote in 2016 there. Last night, he won 45% of the vote there. Just kind of shows you that even though Ron DeSantis had the endorsement of Bob Vander Plaats, who's a very influential conservative Christian leader in Iowa, it didn't maybe necessarily pay off for him because Donald Trump still won over a lot of that evangelical vote, is what it looks like right now.
I know based on the CBS entrance polling, Donald Trump won with men, with women, with evangelicals, with college educated, non-college educated. You sort of go through the litany of folks. I mean, I think the only groups, Eliott, that to your point, I think Nikki Haley won among voters who identified as saying temperament for their leader was something that they thought was important. She won with moderate voters. But, Ron DeSantis, I think the only group that he carried were folks who made abortion. They said that abortion was their biggest issue, again, because he was trying to play to the evangelical crowd. But one of the things I noted, too, was, and you and I both know enough about Donald Trump to know this is going to irk him. He won 98 of the 99 counties. He didn't get all 99. That last county, Johnson County, where University of Iowa, Caitlin Clark, I learned my Iowa news when I was there.
Good job.
Exactly. Donald Trump lost Johnson County by one vote. That's got to irk him a little bit.
And it was striking, too, because I was in the media filing center, and so I was watching the map, turn different colors for different candidates as the results poured in, and Donald Trump was this dark red color, and it was just every county, dark red, dark red, dark red. Just he was dominating the map. And then all of a sudden, Johnson County pops up, and it's blue for Nikki Haley. Don't take the colors there to mean parties. But, just watching one come up, there was almost kind of an audible in the room to see that. And then you see that, Trump lost that by just one vote. It certainly is interesting.
Amanda, you may mention a second ago about the ground operation. That was one of the reasons why I had wanted to go to Iowa, was to look at this ground operation, because if the results were different, that was going to be the explanation. But, Ron DeSantis invested tens of millions of dollars in terms of his ground operation there. The super PAC Never Back Down, which is supporting him, invested heavily in the state. I think he did more than 250 events. He visited all 99 counties. And now we see the results, the 30-point loss. He may say his ticket got punched, but I'm curious, what do you think happened? What happened with this ground operation of his? I realize the turnout was lower, and maybe that had an effect on it because of the cold temperatures. Only about 105,000 out of the expected 170, 180,000 caucus goers showed up. But what was your take on the ground operation at the end of the day for DeSantis? Did Trump just have a better one at the end of the day?
I think there's a couple things here, Jim. I think number one, the cold definitely played a role because Ron DeSantis was trying to touch as many hands as possible, get as many people out there. But, you can't predict a once-in-a-decade storm with blizzard conditions and sub-zero temperatures. I mean, that had an impact. But another thing, I think, maybe was DeSantis's calculations going into this race. I talked to Ron DeSantis just a couple days before the caucus and asked him how much he modeled his campaign based off of past or previous caucus winners, Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum. He told me that they largely did base their campaign off of these three winners, based off of the grassroots ground game that those three winners had. Those three winners did the 99 county tour. They invested heavily in evangelical voters in Iowa. They, shook every hand and, really just made that grassroots Iowa traditional style the core of their campaign. And I think DeSantis saw that and modeled his campaign off of that. What's different here, though, is that this is largely an unprecedented caucus cycle because Donald Trump came in with a name recognition that we really haven't seen in a caucus cycle before. A former president kind of running as a quasi-incumbent. That really threw a curveball into this whole caucus cycle, and it was hard to predict, how much of an impact that was going to have. I think DeSantis kept telling us, hey, this ground game is going to pay off because Trump has more name recognition than me. But once I introduce myself to every Iowan in the state and convince them that I'm a better choice, they're going to go tell their friends and neighbors. But it looks like at the end of the day, Donald Trump just has this mega celebrity status about him. When I went to events, I look back at the Iowa State Fair back in August. I mean, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, they had decent sized crowds that showed up to see them. But when Donald Trump came, it was almost like the whole state fair shut down. I mean, there was just herds and herds of people climbing up on cars just to get a glimpse of Trump, and people waiting in hours-long lines just to watch him walk in. And so we wondered, is that because he was a former president or because he just has that much support in Iowa? And, he clearly came away with the landslide victory on caucus night. So you can take that to mean, what you want.
Amanda, I want to ask you one more question before we let you go. Jim and I were here in Miami at 8:30 last night when this race was called. That would have been 7:30 your time. People were still caucusing. What is the reaction there in Iowa? Are people saying that this race was called too soon and that could have had an impact on the results of these caucuses?
Yeah, I think that when the race was called, there was less than 1% of precincts reporting. So everyone was very surprised to see that. That being said, Trump had such an insurmountable lead that it was obvious maybe at that point that he was going to come out on top. But I heard, anecdotally, people that were in caucuses who had not even voted yet. And, there was one person who said he was waiting to vote, and someone stood up and said, the projected winner is Donald Trump. And everyone looked around at each other and said, but we haven't even caucused yet. And, the caucus still went on, but some people in that location actually left. So there's a chance that it maybe did have an impact, although our political analysts say if that had any impact, it would have been marginal just because there was such a massive gap between Donald Trump and his Republican rivals. But obviously, Ron DeSantis' camp is not happy about how that went down.
No, we heard the governor say that. Amanda Rooker, political reporter for KCCI. You've been working so hard. Jim and I both think you should buy a plane ticket and come down here to South Florida and take a well-deserved vacation. Thank you.
I may do just that. I need some warmth.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Great job, Amanda. Thank you. All right, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in New Hampshire tonight, but that's not where his focus was earlier today. DeSantis appeared in South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state. Here's some of what he had to say.
I'm asking for your support next month when South Carolina votes. I can promise you this, as the nominee, we'll sweep to victory just like we did in Florida, and it'll be a big night. As a leader, I'll always conduct myself in a way that you can be proud of, and as your president, I promise you, I will get the job done, I will make no excuses, and I will not let you down. Thank you all. God bless.
All right, Jim, what does DeSantis have to do to win South Carolina, and does he have the money to win South Carolina?
You nailed it. That's the real question. Look, New Hampshire doesn't shake out really well for the DeSantis voter. That's not really his strong point. You know, he was playing to evangelicals. One of the things he did, we all experienced here in Florida for the past 3 years, was all of these culture war issues, the attacks on Disney, the abortion legislation, you know, the attacks on LGBTQ, all of these things, the attack on woke, all of that was designed to catapult him into a strong showing in Iowa. That didn't happen. He did that even though he knew that it was going to hurt him in New Hampshire, because in New Hampshire, they have a different sort of view. They're not really as conservative socially as other states. And so in New Hampshire, he's got to compete there, but he's not going to invest a lot of time. I talked to somebody high up in the DeSantis campaign. They said, we're absolutely going to be in New Hampshire, but at the same time, they also realize the next big fight for them is going to be in South Carolina.
I want to ask you about what DeSantis has been saying about being the alternative to Donald Trump. Listen to this.
Well, I'm the alternative. I mean, you know, she said that the top two were whoever came in second to Trump in Iowa was going to be the alternative. She said that was going to be her. It was not. It was me. We did that.
So here's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering, is he saying this because Donald Trump has 91 criminal charges that he's facing, and maybe at one point he won't be able to run or win the election because he's tied up with that? And the alternative, here I am, Ron DeSantis.
I think what you have to remember is, what was Ron DeSantis's reason for running a year ago? Like when he started to lay the groundwork for his presidential campaign, what he was saying was that Donald Trump was going to be unelectable. I am Donald Trump without the baggage. I am the candidate that can sort of carry the Donald Trump mantle forward. But what we've learned since then is that voters aren't looking for a Donald Trump alternative. They want Donald Trump. And so, you know, the idea that Donald Trump is unelectable, the polling shows that Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis do just about as well against Joe Biden. You know, Nikki Haley does a little bit better than Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump in a one-on-one matchup with Joe Biden. So the argument, the reason for him putting out his campaign early on was I can get elected and carry on the message. Donald Trump can't win a general election. And unfortunately, voters don't seem to care about that right now, and they don't believe it. They believe that Donald Trump can, in fact, beat Joe Biden.
But, Jim, how long can Donald Trump keep this up? For example, he won Iowa. He was briefly in Iowa, and the next day, today, he's in a courtroom in New York where there is the damages part of the trial filed by E. Jean Carroll, the woman who claims that he sexually assaulted her in the 1990s.
See, I think we look at it from a sane standpoint, and we think to ourselves, being in a civil courtroom where you've been found liable for sexual battery, or in a criminal courtroom where you have 91 counts against you in 4 different districts, as a negative. Donald Trump has turned the courtroom into the campaign. It's what he does in those courtrooms and what he says outside those courtrooms is as important as any rally he holds in Iowa, New Hampshire, or South Carolina. Essentially, the courtroom is an extension of his campaign.
Jim, you've covered so many elections in your career. Is Donald Trump running as an incumbent, even though he's not the sitting president?
Donald Trump is running as an incumbent. Donald Trump is running as an insurgent. And Donald Trump is running as a victim. He's running as all of the above. He is finding ways to check everyone's box. He's running as an incumbent who says, look at my record. If you like the economy when I was president, vote for me. We saw that in the entrance polls in Iowa. People who had the economy as their highest issue said they're supporting Donald Trump because they believe the economy was better for them during the Trump years. He's running as a chaos agent, as an insurgent, because he's promising to once again blow everything up and create that chaos atmosphere, which Americans, a lot of Americans, especially on the right, want. They want a disruptor. And he's running as a victim. And that victim is, I am the target of all this litigation, whether I'm a victim of the Justice Department, I'm a victim of all these lawsuits, and I'm the only reason they're coming after me is because I protected you. Now, We can argue the merits of that and why that's a specious argument, but for the voters who support him, that registers with them, and that's why he is doing so well and will likely be the nominee.
And regardless who is number 1, 2, or 3, there appears to remain a clear front runner in these early primary states.
But I will tell you, there is one area of concern that I would be if I was the Donald Trump folks right now, even in very conservative Iowa, just talking about what we were just doing about the victimhood and all the rest of it. 2/3, a lot of people have drawn attention to the fact that 2/3 of Iowa voters in the caucus last night said that they would not find Donald Trump being convicted, not just charged, but convicted of a felony, to be unfit for office, that Donald Trump would still be fit for office even if he's convicted. I look at the other part of that. If 1/3 of conservative Republican voters think that Donald Trump is unfit to be president, that's a problem in the general election. But Donald Trump is not in a general election right now. Donald Trump is fighting for a primary, which is why last night when Donald Trump was giving his victory speech, he was very nice to Ron DeSantis. He was very nice to Nikki Haley. Why? Because he's already starting to pivot to that general election argument.
He was magnanimous last night, right?
Magnanimity is not something you normally attribute to Donald Trump.
I was surprised. The former president is holding a rally in Atkinson, New Hampshire tonight. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is there for us.
The race for the 2024 presidential nomination quickly moved on to New Hampshire after the Iowa caucuses, where Donald Trump had a resounding victory. He made a detour to a courtroom in Manhattan before coming here to Atkinson, New Hampshire, where he's hoping to secure the nomination. The winner of the last 3 competitive Republican primaries here in New Hampshire eventually went on to win the party's nomination. One of those candidates was former President Donald Trump. He won here in 2016 in the primary and went on to win the nomination after a loss in Iowa. Nikki Haley is really hoping that New Hampshire could be her redemption. She came in 3rd place in Iowa, but has been really aggressively campaigning here in New Hampshire, hoping to come at least within striking distance of Donald Trump. She's hoping that Chris Christie's exit from the race, those voters might move over to her camp. And she's also tapping into independent or undeclared voters here in New Hampshire who can vote in the presidential primary. And they make up more than 39% of the electorate. So a dominant factor here. Ron DeSantis, for his part, is going to be here in New Hampshire. But first, he went down to South Carolina to try to pressure Nikki Haley in her home state. He's coming off a 30-point loss to Donald Trump in Iowa, coming in 2nd place. He hasn't been competing as heavily here in New Hampshire, but is hoping to keep it competitive, at least with Nikki Haley, to prevent her from taking on Donald Trump. The race is really moving at a critical pace here, but we won't likely see candidates debate. The debate scheduled for this week has been canceled when Nikki Haley said she will only show up if Donald Trump does, and he gave no indication that he planned on changing his strategy. New Hampshire has long been a refuge for candidates seeking a new hope in New Hampshire after Iowa. It's been a better predictor of presidential nominees, and it's a state that's small in size, but actually will likely have more voters than Iowa. Those hoping to prevent Donald Trump from becoming the nominee think New Hampshire could really be the last stand. Caitlin Huey-Burns, CBS News, Atkinson, New Hampshire.
A different electorate and a different dynamic in New Hampshire and in South Carolina. We'll have more from the campaign trail when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to our CBS News Miami special, Voters Decide. Before the break, CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns took us to the New Hampshire rally former President Trump is holding tonight.
Let's take a listen to some of what he told his supporters.
As you know, last night we had a record-setting evening in Iowa. What a great place that is, too. The largest margin of victory in GOP history. Is that good? Is that good? And the previous record, as you know, was 12 points, so we beat it by more than 30 points. So that was really something. That's a long year. That's a lot of years. So we were honored by it. They're really great people also. The whole country is great, frankly. And they want to see change. They want to see change. because right now our country's not doing too well. We're laughed at all over the world. This is not going to happen for long, but I do worry about 10 more months with these people, because they can do a lot of damage. What they're doing to our country is very sad. We were the first candidate ever to get more than 52% of the vote. We now have our eyes on a very special place. You know what that place is? New Hampshire.
So, Eliott, I can tell you that one of the things that's interesting is he only had about one event scheduled for this week. He wasn't going to be spending a lot of time in New Hampshire, but he's now doubled down, and he's got events almost every single day in New Hampshire. I think, and you're going to see his ads. If we were in New Hampshire right now on TV, we'd be seeing ads attacking Nikki Haley. He, after basically thinking that he basically took out Ron DeSantis in Iowa, he's now pivoting to Nikki Haley, and I think that's going to be where he's going to focus a lot of his attention. A lot of his fire is against her there in New Hampshire.
So much for the magnanimous Donald Trump we heard last night saying, "Oh, Nikki and Ron, you guys did a great job."
But it's still that speech. That's a general election speech. Yeah. That's not even like he didn't even invoke either of their names. But I think that he's pivoting. But at the same time, you know, he knows that Nikki Haley is biting at his heels in New Hampshire. He does not want any sort of an upset. So I think he's going to be spending more time. And then, like I said, his hope is to finish them both in South Carolina.
Nikki Haley has the support of the Governor Sununu there in New Hampshire.
Well, how did that work out for Ron DeSantis in Iowa, having the support of Kim Reynolds in Iowa?
Not too well.
Yeah.
All right, still to come, the important dates ahead on the primary calendar and what you should be watching. That's next. Welcome back to our extended coverage on the Iowa caucus and the primaries coming up in New Hampshire and South Carolina. I'm Eliott Rodriguez with Jim DeFede. Okay, Jim, Iowa is now in the history books. Some big dates, though, coming up. I think we have a look at some of those dates. Let's take a look at the big dates coming up. As we discussed, the New Hampshire primary is 1 week from tonight. Nevada's Republican caucus, nobody's talking much about that, Jim, is February the 8th. The South Carolina Republican primary follows on the 24th. And then Super Tuesday is Tuesday, March 5th, followed by the Florida primary on March 19th. As you can see, several other states are voting on that day as well.
So the reason nobody's talking about Nevada is Nevada changed their rules in a way that benefited Donald Trump. He has a very strong control of the Nevada GOP. So there's going to be a primary and a caucus. Nikki Haley signed up for the primary. DeSantis and Trump signed up for the caucus. The only way that you can get delegates is in the caucus. So it's a little complicated. So that's why pretty much everyone's sort of bypassing Nevada. After New Hampshire, South Carolina's next. But the real question I have is, if the governor doesn't do well, meaning our governor doesn't do well in South Carolina, is he going to risk being embarrassed and stay in the race all the way to Florida, where he might lose his home state? Nikki Haley is running the risk of losing her home state, which is always embarrassing. And if Ron DeSantis doesn't really rebound and start raising money, then he could be. I think he's going to get out before he has to lose Florida.
Yeah, some possible embarrassments coming up. And before we go, just clear up one thing, because I heard over and over again last night that Nikki Haley has spent the most amount of money in this race, whereas before last night I was hearing that Ron DeSantis wiped out his account.
Well, so what you're hearing is Nikki Haley spent more money than Ron DeSantis on TV. That's what they're talking about in terms of commercials. But Ron DeSantis spent tens of millions of dollars organizing, flying planes into Iowa, hiring staff and office space and all those things that come with it. So there was that ground operation was where he invested so much money, and it did not pay off. Now, never back down. The super PAC who's supporting him, they are now trying to raise money. Ron DeSantis his campaign is out of money. The super PAC is trying to raise money, but with showing like this, that's going to be the real problem. Campaigns don't usually just end; they just run out of money, and that's usually when a candidate goes away.
Okay, so we showed a lot of dates a minute ago. Which dates stand out to you?
South Carolina, I think, because I don't think Ron DeSantis is expecting to win or even come close in New Hampshire. The real question is whether or not Nikki Haley wins, can beat Trump in New Hampshire. And then it's an all or nothing in South Carolina. I think that's going to be where there's going to be a real fight. And I'm hoping to get down up to South Carolina. I like Charleston. The food's good there.
It's a very nice city.
It's a very nice city,
I agree
yes.
with you there. And Jim, thank you very much. That's going to do it for this CBS News Miami special, Voters Decide. We will be with you all throughout the campaign season through election night on November the 5th. Remember, you can always find us streaming on CBS News Miami on Pluto TV and the CBS News Miami app. On behalf of my colleague Jim DeFede, a big thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good night. See you on CBS Miami at 11.